This is Into the Absurd, episode number 17 with Mike Silvio. He has traveled the entire world to all seven continents. And in fact, he's ran a marathon on all seven continents, which, I mean, I can barely run 7 miles. So that is a huge feat.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And how has all this been? How has it been traveling the world? Um, w-
You know,
yeah.
it's been great. It's I guess it's one of those goals you work on, and while you're working on it, and when you start it, it seems a bit overwhelming, and then once you do it, you're like, it's done. What do you move on to? But it's great to sometimes stop and reflect on what a great experience it was, and how grateful I am, that I started running and all the things that all the health benefits and all the good that came from it over the years. And it's been just a fantastic journey. And now I'm looking for where do I go next, especially during COVID. You want to get back out and get back on the road and travel again.
Yeah. So
So
so how did
um,
you get into it?
well, so I was always kind of a runner. I ran in high school, like a lot of people do, cross country and track. And I was never the top guy. I was usually, the number three, number four guy, or kind of in the mix. But I always appreciated it. And then uh, during my 20s, I really didn't run much at all. I worked as a musician. Um, for the most part. And so I wasn't real active during that period of my life. And then uh, you get older and you start to have different issues, and I was a little heavy, and I became diabetic. So I was adult onset diabetes. And um, and that's one of the things that drove me into a more active lifestyle. And in 2009, the first the big recession hit in '09. And we're all taking pay cuts here in Detroit. Automotive is very cyclical in nature. I work in the auto industry, and we all took 10% pay cuts, and some people worse than that, and were affected. And so to offset that kind of loss of income, I quit playing golf and bought a pair of running shoes, and I really started to take running seriously. And it was great. I spent the better part of 5 years, kind of pursuing that goal of running, around the world and running these marathons. But it was, a combination of, I knew I had to exercise because of the diabetes. I knew I had to get active, but I'm the kind of person that needs a big goal, right? And so having that goal um, was just a way for me to focus on the long term of getting out every day and running and putting in the miles. And probably during that period of time, I ran probably about 7,000 miles, when I was, really, training for all these marathons. Now I'll do, with COVID, I haven't run any, last marathon I ran was was fall of 2019, because everything was shut down last year. But I was running one or two marathons a year and traveling, as much as I could to run. And it was just it was a great journey. But 7,000 miles does take its toll on you from a time standpoint, but from a health standpoint, it's fantastic. Uh, you just have to do all the right things to protect yourself. Um, so that was, really, um, a big part of starting was just, you know, I knew that golf wasn't very healthy and running was, and running I thought was going to be inexpensive. And it was before I started flying around the world. Then
Yeah.
it got a little bit more expensive, getting to Antarctica and getting to Asia, is you know, it can be a budget buster for a lot of people, especially if you don't build up frequent flyer miles with your normal job, which I'm very thankful. I get a lot of miles, when I travel for work, so I was able to cut some costs that way. But yeah, that's how it started.
What do you do for work?
So I'm a supply chain person. So I work in various companies. I teach at Wayne State University in Detroit, where I teach supply chain management. But we're largely focused on what we call the procure to pay process, right? We buy materials for the auto industry, and then we have to manage the shipment of those materials into our plants, and then we manufacture whatever part it is, depending who we're working for, and then it's got to ship out to the OEM who makes the cars, like a Ford or a Chrysler, Ford or a GM, or um, any of those, Tesla. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to manage our purchase price. We're trying to manage how much material we have in the plant. It's not real glamorous, but it's like a puzzle. So you're always thinking about, you know, what's the best way to do it? What's the
Mm,
best, how often do we want to bring it in? Uh, because in the automotive, it's such a tough industry, and the margins are so thin. You're largely managing your inventory and your dollars, and so that's where we come in. And I've been in this line of work for a long time, and enjoy it immensely. And because of the nature of it, you get to travel a lot,
yeah.
and so you're always on the road building up those miles.
Yeah, no, definitely. It sounds like you work a lot with efficiency, and I guess that kind of ties into your
Yeah.
mindset as a marathon runner, right? You have to make sure that you conserve your energy during a marathon, so you have to use your body in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, but when when you're when you're training for a marathon, no matter what you have to do at the office, you seem to wake up in the morning and say, okay, when am I going to get my training in? There were days that I'd get up at 3:30 in the morning and run 20 miles and then go to the office, right?
Yeah.
And so you're always trying to figure, okay, when am I going to fit everything in? And then when you're running, and actually running a marathon, there's a lot of different approaches, a lot of different strategies, and again, I'm kind of a middle of the pack guy, right? I'm not winning the races, but I'm trying my very best to hit my goals.
Mhm.
And there's a lot that you learn over a couple of races, between your first race and your 10th race. There's a lot of lessons learned about your body, about how your body reacts, about fueling your body, and what kind of rest you need during the training process. And I don't repeat races that often, just because there's so many great places to visit. So every race is different. Some are hot, some are cold, some are hilly, some are flat, and so you've got to adjust your plan, and and just manage your body, and listen to it, right? I mean, you've got to know when there's an appropriate time to rest, and you got to know when it's appropriate time to really push. And so I've been lucky enough to do that, and I'm looking forward to everything opening up again
Yeah.
this spring. I got a half marathon coming up in a couple weeks that I'll get out and just stretch my legs on and get a feel for. And then, next, this coming fall or winter, I'm, I've got my eyes on a couple of trips. If they can open things up, I'm ready to travel and to experience things. I've been fortunate that as I've done these races, I tend to take time to enjoy the environment, the community. So I'll try not to go in just for a day, but I'll try to go in and stay for, 3 days, 4 days, even 2 weeks, to make a trip out of it and really enjoy it. And as I said, you know, as I sit back and reflect on it, there are a lot of lessons that I learned and took from these, 7 continents. Um, and some of these continents I've run a couple times. because there's various races there that I wanted to run. There's all these major races, kind of like NASCAR, where there's these big races that everybody wants to run and run. Marathoning is the same way, and it's such a great community, and supportive, and people that want, when you get there, there's really no competition, because there's either 100 people or there's
Yeah.
10,000 people, right? And you're all there to support each other. But in North America, what I really learned was that there's no one that supports you like your family.
Hmm.
And I've run a number of marathons in North America and a number of races, but the one I count as the official, kind of towards my seven continents, is the Detroit Marathon, right? And that's my hometown. And uh, you know, it's for those of you that live in Detroit, it's kind of unusual. Um, it's an unusual race because it's, I think, the only marathon where you actually run a mile underwater, and so you kind of run over the Ambassador Bridge into Canada, then you run through downtown Windsor, and then you go through an underwater tunnel back to Detroit. So
Wow.
it's kind of unusual, and it's so cool. You come out of the tunnel and it's echoey and people are yelling and cheering, and you come out and there's just this rush of cold air, and you know there's this all of these people that are there supporting you, right? There's the you know the security people from border protection, kind of watching to make sure no one's running in that shouldn't run in. And
Yeah.
of course, uh, you know but that's the race where my family's generally there, because I can't always take them with me on these trips. And so my wife is there, my kids are there, and I stop and high five my kids. They were smaller then, but there's you kind of run into Detroit, back in Detroit, and then you kind of run down the river, and you go onto an island called Belle Isle, and it's a state park. It's a 5 miles around. It's a beautiful island, and it's windy and cold. But when I got to the island, my mother was there, and she had a sign that said "Go Mike," right? And then when I come off the island, my mother was there, and my mom's in her she was in her late 60s at the time. Now she's a little bit older than that, but I came off the island. She had a big sign that said "Go Mike," and I had it. That was my best race. I ran like a 3 hour 38-minute marathon, which anytime you're below 4, I always feel really good about that. But afterwards, I asked my mom. I'm like, it took me a half an hour to get around the island. And I asked her, I said, how long were you out there? Because you were waiting for me, and to come by that, to get there the first time, the second time. And she said, I was out there for hours. And I'm like, why? And she said, you wouldn't believe how many people are named Mike. And so she just stood out there and wished every Mike a great race. She was everybody's mom that day, right? No one will support you like family like that, right? It's such a special thing.
Yeah.
When you can encourage someone to be successful,
Mm.
to live out their dream. And early on when I was running, your body doesn't even know if you can do it. You've done the training, you've run the miles, but anything can happen, right? And so having that encouragement is really important. And that was a story that, because I've run in North America, I've done the Marine Corps and Chicago and New York, and all great races. I mean, New York is amazing, but your hometown race and have your family there is really important. It
Mm.
means something. And but where I got the bug for traveling and running, I had run a half marathon in the Netherlands on a work trip. I had some friends that wanted to run, and it just was like you know you're there, and your people are cheering for you, and you don't understand a word they're saying, right? They're
Yeah.
just cheering and giving encouragement. And so I got back from the Netherlands from running the Venlo half, and I looked at my work schedule and said, where do I have to go? and I had to go to Brazil. And so I called up a running buddy of mine and I said, do you have any interest in going and running a race in Brazil? And he immediately said, I've got lots of frequent flyer miles. I'll meet you there, because I had to go for work. So I didn't
Yeah.
have to spend any money on the trip. And he said, I'll meet you there and we'll go run the Rio de Janeiro marathon.
Wow.
And, and it was there, because that was my second marathon. So I didn't really have any experience. I just was like, I want to travel and do this. And that was where I learned that you can accomplish more than you think you can. That was, running a marathon is a stretch. The first one was a stretch to actually get that
Mhm.
26.2 in. And Rio's beautiful. I mean, what you see on TV, and there was an Olympics there years ago, and it was beautiful. And you're on the beach, and you're really enjoying all the sights. And we did all the tours and made the most of it. And it was just the beaches is just breathtaking. But we got up in the morning, and it's one of those races. A lot of them are basically loops. Detroit's a loop. You start and finish at the same spot, right? So it's pretty easy to you park your car and you go run. But Rio's a little bit different in that the starting line is 26.2 miles away from the finish line. So you have to take a bus or have someone drop you off
Hmm.
all the way down the coast. And it's a beautiful run. It's up, the ocean is on your right the entire way. And so
Wow.
it's really cool. But there was a mishap, and the bus that was supposed to take us from the hotel didn't show up. And so we're
Hmm.
kind of in a panic. We're all looking at each other. Everybody that's there is like, oh, what do we do? What do we do? And so we started jumping in taxi cabs. Well, knowing your way around your city is not a requirement in Brazil. You just have to have a car. So the taxi driver didn't know where the marathon was starting, didn't know where he was going. And so he actually dropped us off 2 miles from the starting line and 20 minutes after the race started. So we were literally the last four people to start the marathon. So,
Yeah.
he drops you off and you've got to run 2 miles to the starting line. So that day, I ran 28.2 miles. That was the farthest I've ever run. And, and you we literally were like running together and we're like, how do we dig in to run this extra 2 miles? Now extra 2 miles doesn't sound like much, but you tack it on the end of 26 and you're
It's
running
a
a lot of
lot.
miles. And yeah, and I've had some longer runs since then. But that's when I realized that in my head I could only run 26.2, but if I wanted to complete my goal, I had to do more than I thought I could. I had to really
Mm.
stretch. And I think everyone has that ability to dig down deep and do what's important when they need to. And you hear stories of heroism all the time. People that do these incredible things that they never thought they could do, but when they needed to, they did more, right? And it's always remarkable to see that. And we see that, I mean, people, you know especially with the times that we're in, that are doing more for others that they may not have ever done before, right?
Mhm.
And so it's incredible. And so that day, my friend and I, um were really keyed up on, and that was the day that we registered for Antarctica. And so it's a 4-year waiting list to get in,
Wow.
but we signed up. And so and my friend runs a lot. He does a ton of running and does a lot of tries and such. And he was like, yeah, we'll do this. He's an adventurer. Well, and meanwhile I get home and I'm thinking to myself, okay, you know I got North America done, I got South America done, and I just registered for Antarctica. That means that to get to my 7 marathons, I got to run 4 more marathons, right, in between that time. And so I signed up right away to go to Africa. And I went to Kenya, and I ran the SafariCon marathon, and it's not a big marathon. It was my first small marathon. There's only 120 runners, right? And so you fly in to Kenya, and it's several hours out of their capital city, and you're immediately kind of out in the wild, right? So you know on the good days you're in a hotel, but for the majority of it you're actually in a tent, and it's a nice tent. And
Yeah.
you've got your own bathroom, right, behind the tent, and a shower. But if you want to take a shower, you've got to like contact somebody, and they bring over hot water and put it up above the tent so you can pull the chain. And So the marathon was on an 86,000 acre savanna. So you're out running, and there are rhinos and elephants and lions and giraffes all around you, and it's not like the zoo where there's a barrier. It's
Yeah.
You're on a dirt road. And so we're on safari the night before, and we're looking at their signs with kilometer markers, like 20, 15. And we're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, we're on safari tracking jaguars, and on the very road that we're going to be running tomorrow. And so what they did was they flew helicopters overhead to scare away the big game, because they don't want to interact with humans any more than you want to interact with them, really. So they had helicopters flying over, and they had armed rangers at certain points, just to make sure things were safe. And that race was all about charity, right? And and if there was one place that I went where I think changed my perspective of the world. And I've been traveling, for years, to automotive, manufacturing locations.
Mm.
Um, but when I went to Africa, what I saw, really changed me. And it was not as much the things that I saw, but the people that I met. The gratitude that they showed for what they have, and we all have some sense of gratitude within us, and we just have to find that gratitude, what we're thankful for. And especially, I keep saying, these tough times, right? And so we did a couple really cool things besides this race. um, uh, we visited a water project, where they pump water to a village, and where it's clean, and people will walk 4 or 5 miles to get fresh water, right? And so we got to visit a water project. We got to visit a school, with it's a dirt floor school, and the climate there, and the conditions. When you were in grade school, there was a poster on the wall with the alphabet, right? And they had the same thing there, except because of the water and the conditions, everything would be sewn into like a piece of fabric that they would hang on the wall.
Mhm.
And not only was it the alphabet, but they would have basic instructions for safety, like if you cut yourself, things that we would take for granted. You get a band-aid, but there, if you cut yourself and don't treat it, you could get an infection and you could die. And so just these basics of life, right, that we consider basic, to them is badly needed. And so we filled up these probably these big duffel bags full of school supplies to bring to the schools, right? And we all collected stuff, and we brought it in. But the thing about Africa was, that was the race where my friends and family started to take my goal seriously, right? It wasn't just
Yeah.
something you say when you're at the bar one night, like, I'm gonna go run a marathon in every continent,
Yeah.
and they're like, well, you ran Detroit, all right, you did Rio. But when you
Yeah.
actually spend the money to go, spend a week and a half, um, you know traveling through Africa, people start to think, man, this this guy's a little crazy and he's serious about this. And that's where, my coworkers got behind me, my boss got behind me, because you come home and you're showing them these amazing pictures of, I probably went on, 9 safaris while I was there, and you're showing
Yeah.
these pictures. And so the people around you get behind your goal, right?
Hmm.
Your coaches and your, people you run with. And I had one goal when I went to that race. I wanted to beat one Kenyan, because they're traditionally, a lot faster than we are. And so, and there's only 120 runners, and I probably beat a dozen of them. It was so hot and hilly. It was just, it was the most challenging race, um, one of the most challenging races I've run. It's I mean, we were taking sponges the size of bricks, and they were just in cold water, and we were just taking them and dumping them over our heads, just any kind of relief from the heat. It was just, at the start it was fine, but at the end it was just unbearable. And um, so really, really cool, to have, your friends and people rally around you, and your coaches rally around you. Because you can't do this alone, right? It takes a team of people to get you there. And when I
Hmm.
ran um, Asia, I really learned that, right? It takes a team of professionals to get you across the finish. And I always tell people, professionals hire professionals, right? It's one thing to, be a DIY guy and repair some things yourself. But when it's really important, you hire a real estate agent, you get an engineer, you don't do it yourself. You hire the people that are really good at it when it's really important. And
Hmm.
when I ran Asia, the race that I chose to run was Tokyo, because it's one of the majors. And and again, a remarkable run. It's like it's a city run, so it's good pavement. Unlike Africa, I mean, it's wonderful. And you're running by these Shinto shrines and Buddha shrines. And I had a hip injury going into it, but it's not like a race where you just say, well, I got an injury, I'm not going to run it, and you're out $45 or $100. Or in the case of a real expensive race like, New York is, I think, around $300, and you're just like,
Hmm.
well, I can't run it. Forget it. The money goes away. When you're planning a trip to Tokyo, the flight's expensive.
Hmm.
Everything is expensive about it, right?
Yeah.
You're sinking thousands of dollars into this race. So even though you've got an injury, you're trying to do anything you can to get there. And
Mm.
again, I'm not racing to win the race. I'm running it to finish. So whether I do a 340 or a 440 doesn't matter to me, right? I'm there for the experience. So the first of all, the Tokyo race is really cool because you're running by these shrines, but a high percentage of the people are dressed up in costumes, because it's just the thing that they do in Japan. They're all dressed as cartoon characters and video game characters and Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse. I mean, a lot of them. And there's nothing worse for a runner to be beaten by someone dressed as a giant M&M candy, right? And so I get there, and I'm supposed to, I was supposed to start. They start races in corrals, so the fastest people in front and the slowest people are behind. So we're not running around people. We're always running with people our like speed. And so I was supposed to be in like the second corral or the third corral, B or C, something like that. Because I was running fairly well at the time. And the vast majority of people in these big runs they don't run that fast, right? They're running for
Hmm.
the experience. So because my hip was bad, I purposely went all the way to the back and started in one of the last corrals, which would be like J. So to give you an idea of how many people it takes to go from A to J, that's about 30,000 runners that are all
Hmm.
on the streets that day. And it was well organized. And I, you know, it was a tough race. When a hip is an injury, and it's part of your body and the mechanics that you use every single step. right? So I've had other injuries that like it's a toe and maybe you wrap it and there's things that you can do to kind of get by, but a hip is just something you just have to take it slow.
Mm.
And again, I had to deal with it. So I did all the shots, I did everything. My doctors, everybody, they got me to the line, which was really important. But at mile 22, um, I passed this guy that was running, and he was barefoot, and his arms were extended out, and he was, again, everybody's in costume. His arms were extended out, and he was fastened to a cross, and he was running fastened to this cross, and he stopped at the side of the road, and a random spectator was giving him water, right? And so, and he's only in a loincloth, so obviously
Yeah.
he's just as Jesus, right, to run this race. And um and so he was depending on a team of people, of others, to help
Yeah.
him get to where he wanted to go and to finish. And it just struck me that when you're serious about a goal, you need to have a team, you need to build a
Mhm.
team. You can't be afraid to stop and ask others for help, to share their wisdom, to share their
Mhm.
water. And obviously a little prayer helps, which is I
Mm.
think what he depended on. And it was a moving moment, right? To see that. And then I finished that race. My time wasn't great, it didn't matter to me, but I got the medal. And then from there I flew to Beijing and climbed the Great Wall of China. It
Wow.
was just a remarkable experience, to do all that. And of course, thankfully, I was able to schedule all that around business meetings, so it was really cool.
So what's
Uh,
the Great Wall
and
of
then,
China like?
well, inconsistent. There is no
Yeah.
step that is the same height or depth, so you're constantly kind of navigating. And I was there on a very high pollution day, and so you could only see so far, but the vastness of it was remarkable. Um, when you run a marathon, getting upstairs is not so bad, but walking downstairs is very painful because of the tightness in your hamstring. So it was a painful experience. But I knew that was going to be, and I've been to China, probably 4 or 5 times, but I knew that was my only trip to Beijing. So I really wanted to see the Great Wall. And again, it's just one of the great wonders of the world. And there's so many great things to see in this world that I don't know how you could ever grow tired of traveling, right? It
Mhm.
just was a very cool experience. One that I wish I could have um, uh, done with more people. You always want to, like, I wish I could bring my whole family for some of these, but if you're on business trips, combining with running, you can't.
Yeah.
But some trips I've been able to do with family and friends. Um, when I ran Europe, I was originally trying to run with somebody, but they couldn't do it. So um, I was supposed to run a marathon in Italy. I was going to run the Rome Marathon, and I was actually out there with a friend to share the experience. And again, that I was injured, but injury was so bad I couldn't run. So you know, my buddy and I really just spent the whole weekend in Rome drinking and eating,
Yeah.
which was you know a lot of fun too. But we didn't get the marathon in, so I had to go back, and I was on a timeline because I had to get to Antarctica, and
Mhm.
so I'm trying to get these continents done. So I called the travel group that I travel with, because there's a company that specializes in marathon training. There's a couple of them, but at the time I was traveling out with Marathon Tours, and they're super nice people. And the woman that I worked with there, I said, what can you get me into in England in the next period of time, because I'm in shape and I've got flexibility.
Mhm.
And she called me back and said, I've got an opening to run the London Marathon. And do you want to come out and run it? And I said, absolutely. And what I learned about the experience in running that race is that if you run too fast, you might miss the journey. And I don't say that I ran fast, although I ran a pretty good time that race. I flew in the country strictly to run the marathon and flew out immediately afterwards. So um, I only spent, I think, 72 or 74 hours in London and completely, missed the experience of being in London. And I ran past Big Ben. I ran, you know, across the Tower Bridge, and I finished in the shadow of Buckingham Palace. And it's these beautiful places, but I didn't get to experience any of it because I really just went for the run. And and one of the things I always tell people is don't do everything when you travel someplace. Skip one thing and give yourself a reason to come back,
Yeah.
right? And so I I went back with my son to visit London and kind of did a little UK tour with him. Um, but 72 hours is not a lot of time when you're going to spend a good portion of it at the check-in event, getting your numbers, and a
Mhm.
good portion of it, running a marathon, and then completely collapsing afterwards in
Yeah.
exhaustion. Um, but it's a great race. They raise the most money for charity of any race in the world. London, it's all about raising money, and it was a great thing. But I didn't get to even experience that. I couldn't raise any money. It was literally a decision to go run this race, and it was all very last minute. And I'm not sure if I paid a little premium or not, but it doesn't matter. But when I think about it, it was an incredibly selfish thing to do, to to just up and fly someplace for a weekend. I left my wife at home and said, I'm going to go do this, and and go run this all by myself. And but I'm glad I did it. But I learned that, okay, when I do these races, when they go on these trips, I want to bring somebody I care about with me, and I want to take some time to live in the moment, right? to
Mm.
to kind of bask in it, to visit restaurants and see what there is to see. And so I really changed my travel style a little bit. And even some of the trips that I took, I didn't, like with my son, I didn't even run. I ran my normal training runs, but I didn't necessarily run a marathon just because I wanted to share the location and share
Mhm.
the time with my son, which is pretty neat. In my family, my father started a tradition that at 15 years old, um, you do a father-child trip, right? And
Mm.
and at 15, kids still want to spend time with their parents. It's kind of right at the end of that before they become, you know, real independent teenagers, right? So
Yeah.
you get to do that last kind of trip. And traditionally in our culture, the mothers bond with the children because they're kind of taking care of the day-to-day needs for the most part of the kids. And certainly in my household, my wife did the majority of the heavy lifting when it came to my kids, and I was working and traveling. And so when it came time to my daughter's trip, my oldest. She was 15. And so I took her to the Australian Outback to run the Outback Marathon.
Mm.
And, we did kind of the tour. Um, we snorkeled the Great Barrier Reef. We did the bridge climb in Sydney, where you actually, you've seen the New Year's Eve fireworks there. And we didn't just cross the bridge, we climbed the girders to where the flagpoles are at the top. You're
That's
hooked to a
awesome.
wire. We had some great experiences. I was never so scared in my life. But during that race, I ran the Australian Outback Marathon, and my daughter did a shorter run. And so we're running up and down sand dunes, and we're you know keeping eyes open for for snakes and wild camels and kangaroos that you see out there in the outback. And it was an incredible remote beautiful area because you run around Uluru, which is that big rock in the desert, and so you run around this giant rock, and it just it's a just a beautiful place, but it's barren, and it's so remote that the entire territory, if you compare a territory that they have to like one of our states,
Hmm.
there are only 5 porta potties in the entire region, and they booked all 5 of
Hmm.
them for their event.
Yeah.
So that's it's pretty remote when your state only has 5 porta potties available. Um, but there again, building on that experience of creating memories in Australia, I really learned that you need to create memories that outlive the experience,
Hmm.
right? So you take a 2-week trip with your daughter. You know I learned that you can spend 2 weeks with anybody, right? you know um Challenging conditions, right? I mean, time zone changes, lack of sleep, a lot of emotions, a lot of pain, a lot of crying, and that was me, right? My daughter was a trooper. She was tough as nails, made the 24-hour flight there, and was tough. But it was really hard on both of us to actually go through that. But we created these memories that are gonna last her lifetime, not just mine.
Hmm.
Again, with what's happening to the Great Barrier Reef, to be able to run that, to snorkel that and see
Hmm.
the reef, to hike Ayers Rock, to climb the bridge. But I made her part of my dream, right?
Hmm.
And I know that I've showed her a little bit about having to dream, right? And so, and she's a student at University of Michigan now, and is doing yoga and is exercising and doing all the right things. But she had this remarkable experience. So I didn't just make my life more interesting, I made her life more interesting, right? It's a
Yeah.
story she can always tell about her experiences, right? So now the things that I did are going to outlast me.
Hmm.
And so I I think we've covered 6 continents,
Yeah.
which means there's only one left. And this was pretty amazing, for a number of reasons. But Antarctica is where I really learned that you have to listen to your body.
Hmm.
You know, um, the course is different every year, right? So you the weather, you don't know what you're going to get. It's Antarctica. It can change in minutes. There's freezing temperatures. There's steep hills. We had 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts, and it's really exactly what they promised us, right? The race directors, said, this is going to be, really tough. And the race was, you get down there, and I'll tell you about the trip in a second. But you get down there and you go ashore, and you're at the Russian research base. And
Hmm.
so, they go across to set up the race. They bring them a case of vodka. Thank you very much for hosting us. And you're on this rocky shoreline, and that's where Russia is. And the race ran to the China base. And when the race started, a bunch of people from China showed up, and they were going to run with us, right? Because they
Yeah.
are looking for something to do. No Russians ran, but Chinese people ran with us. But the thing that made it really challenging is that the Russian base and the Chinese base were only 2.17 miles apart.
Yeah.
So you know you had to run that same 2.17 miles 12 times. So that big hill you just ran, 12 times. That rocky trail, 12 times. So it was a physical challenge, which all
Wow.
marathons are. But now you had that mental challenge of running the same exact thing. And so you start the race and you drop a water bottle, and then you run 2 miles out and you drop another water bottle. So you've got water to drink because it's completely self-supported. You
Yeah.
can't leave you can't leave any trash, so anything you have with you, you've got to take with you. And so you're being very careful. And the race certainly was the highlight of a 2 week trip for me, because I went and I did some work in Brazil before I went down, and then we met in Buenos Aires and enjoyed ourselves there, and then we fly to this most southern point of Argentina and then hop on this boat. So the boat ride, or the cruise ship, wasn't exactly a cruise ship. It
Yeah.
was a 330-foot long Russian research vessel. So it was about the size of a football field, which is not real big. And we were on it for 2.5 days to get to Antarctica, and it was 2.5 days to get back. And the waters down there are rough. And so, we've all been on boats and it's been a little rough waters.
Yeah.
Well, down there, rough waters means 30-foot swells.
Hmm.
So it's more like what you see in the movies. You can't
Yeah.
even imagine. You're in between 30-foot swells. So,
Yeah.
it's the size of the height of a 3-story building.
It's gotta be scary.
And oh, it's scary, but just walking around, it's like you just drank 14 gin and tonics.
Yeah.
You can't keep on your feet. And
Yeah.
and and so but the experiences of the penguin colonies, the glacial climbs was fantastic.
Yeah.
And preparing for such a race is key, right? And luckily I
Mhm.
live in Michigan, so it's pretty cold. So we're kind of, runners in generally are really in tune with their bodies. We know if we've got a hangnail, we know, because it's just what we do, right? We're always thinking
Mhm.
about it. And so we're aware. But I really struggled with that race in Antarctica, which most people do because it is really tough environments. And I found myself resting from time to time during the last 10 miles. It's a hard course, but the thing was is that I had trouble going into it with my training.
Mhm.
I didn't have the same energy that I usually have. I
Yeah.
didn't, the training didn't feel right. But again, I mean, this race, this is a $10,000 race, and
Yeah.
you're on a waiting list for 4 or 5 years to run it. So you got a lot invested in it, right? You got a lot of
Mhm.
money invested in it. All your friends are like, all right, he's got the last one, he's going to do it. And I really struggled. And when I got, before I left, I made sure as with all these races, you got to make sure you've got the shots for all these things. And for this one, because I wasn't feeling well, my doctor had me go take a stress test to make sure everything, my heart was working and everything was good, and I passed it. Um, but when I got back, I told him about how I struggled, and my doctor, and I'd run a marathon with my doctor. I ran Detroit with him, so we're good friends. And he said, I think you're maybe burned out or a little stressed.
Yeah.
But we talked about it, and he said, oh, I want you to go get another stress test, but this time we're going to do a nuclear stress test where they actually inject a dye in your blood. And um, and so um, I went and had the stress test on, and they were like, you're a marathoner, your heart, you're strong, your heart's fine, don't worry about it. The doctor will call you with the results in 4 or 5 days. The doctor called me in 20 minutes and said, we need to operate. And uh, and so what they found was a 95% blockage in my LED artery, which is the widowmaker,
Mhm.
right? And so they repaired it. I actually had 2 angioplasties because of this. One was just to check on how well it went. But they put a stent in, and you know it was, they tell heart patients, don't shovel the snow.
Mhm.
There's a big snowstorm, people have heart attacks when they shovel the snow. I i ran a marathon in Antarctica with a 95% blockage. If I had had a heart attack in Antarctica, I would have died, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's no getting out of it. There was a doctor on the ship, but
Mhm.
she's taking care of, seasickness and,
Yeah.
muscle injuries. They don't have, they're, this boat, they don't have the necessary equipment to treat somebody. Um,
Mhm.
and it, you know, getting me out for a bypass is just out of the question.
Mhm.
Um, and so, it was surprised, my doctor, that I go to, and I go to the doctor because I'm diabetic every 3 months, you know, he was really surprised because there were no there were no strong symptoms of any
Mm-hmm.
kind of problem, because as a runner my heart is very strong,
Yeah.
and I didn't really have a heart problem. I had an artery problem,
Mm-hmm.
and so it didn't show up. And so had it not been for my my listening to my body, and my experiences and running marathons and such, there is a good chance that eventually I would have had a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have never known about the blockages, but it was because I listened to my body, and I continually questioned and raised my head and said something's
Mm-hmm.
not right, that I got these tests. I have a brother who's 40, well, now he's 49, but he had a heart attack at 45, and he just had another heart attack just this past
Wow.
holiday season. And he's fairly active, but he goes through, ups and
Mm-hmm.
downs where he'll be working and spend a lot of time at his desk and not active. And so, it can be a problem if you're not
Mm-hmm.
listening. And this, I was very fortunate, because at the time, I was 50 years old,
Mm-hmm.
which is young. When you hit 50, it's young. Maybe when you're 25, it sounds pretty old, but what you take from all this, you have to question, okay, why was I allowed by, why did I uh, complete that marathon in Antarctica, complete my 7 marathons, and not have a heart attack?
Mm-hmm.
You start to, you know, kind of think about, what your purpose is, and you spend the first 50 years of your life kind of figuring out who you are and what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're you're going to school, you're having fun. I was playing music. I got a real job and got married and had kids, and did all these things, kind of, you know built my resume, right? And then as you accomplish those things and really understand who you are, then you start to work on writing your eulogy, right? It sounds kind of funny, but you know, what you do, who you are, and who you impact, you don't really get that until you come to some part of realization of who you are. And and so, I've been able to run a number of marathons since I ran these 7, and been able to participate in a couple charities that mean a lot to me. And certainly, I'm an ambassador for Lululemon, which is, great. It allows me to meet a lot of people and share my story with a lot of people. And so, now, a lot of, the purpose that, I have this kind of, sharing, my story and encouraging other people to achieve what their goals are. And I've been teaching, at Wayne State now, a couple classes a semester for, now it's 19 years, where you meet with students and you mentor students and you help them achieve and try to make a difference in someone's life. And there's a lot of satisfaction that comes from that. And I'm just really looking forward to um, you know this period of time passing, where people can get back to normal and races can start and people can start interacting and developing the goals that they want to achieve. It's it's life is too short, and it's sad that we're all spending a year, kind of secluded in our houses. So I hope everybody, this is going to, impact everybody's psyche, going forward. We'll tell these stories forever, about what we've experienced, what we've gone through. um, but you know we've we've got to get back to some normalcy, and people start dreaming and start experiencing the world again. So I'm looking forward. I've already got my eyes on a marathon in Asia that I want to run. I've
Yeah.
got some friends that live in Vietnam, and so I'd love to get to Vietnam and run a marathon there, and visit a part of the world that I haven't seen.
I would love to go to Vietnam.
Yeah, So I mean, but travel, it'll change you.
Yeah.
I remember growing up meeting people that have never left the county, and it's like, boy,
Hmm.
you really there's a lot to see, and I'm not going to
Yeah.
be that person. And
Yeah.
it's all because someone that mentored me and influenced me,
Hmm.
helped me understand that there was more out there. So I've been the beneficiary of good mentors and good teachers. So but that's my 7 marathons, or my 7 continents, my 7 marathons on 7 continents, and the life lessons I learned, and I'm a lucky, very very fortunate individual to have led such a life. I came from a family of auto workers, right? And
Hmm.
then auto workers became managers and became business owners, and so it's my family's the story of any you know family of immigrants, right? And so I'll often wonder what my grandparents would think if they could kind of see what I've been able to do and experience, because they worked their whole life to come to America, and here I've worked my
Hmm.
whole life to get out of it. So I got to see the world. So I'm sure they'd be impressed.
Yeah, no, it's definitely awesome in this modern age that that we're able to even do things like that. Travel the world, collaborate with all these people in different countries, and I mean, run marathons in all 7 continents. Run a marathon in Antarctica. But I did have a question. So were you wearing a coat
Yeah.
in Antarctica?
Yeah, so you definitely gear up, but it wasn't that different from running here in Detroit in the wintertime. You're wearing layers. And the hardest part is that in Antarctica, there'd be periods where the sun would come out and you'd be overheated. And so you'd kind of strip, take off your gloves, take off your hat to let the heat escape. And then a couple minutes later, it would be incredibly cold and you're putting things
Yeah.
back on to try to warm yourself back up. And we eat these things called, kind of like a goo, that there's
Mhm.
different products, but it's basically nutrition while you're running. And it was the only place I'd ever been, or any run that I've been on, where it actually started to freeze up, because usually
Wow.
it's a real loose liquid, right? And it,
Yeah.
it got thick, and I was like, wow, this is so different, than running at home. And because again, the temperatures fluctuate, but it was just it was a challenge because of the terrain, because of the temperature, the winds. And again, the field of runners makes it difficult. They,
Mm.
they can only bring 100 people ashore, per the treaty. And so 100 people come ashore, and then a good part of them are doing a half marathon and part of them are doing the full marathon. So had we been doing a loop like in Africa was 2 half marathon loops. So you go around once, then you go around twice. Um, and but in Because Antarctica was only 2.17 miles, you've just spent a couple days traveling with people, so you get to know people. You're at the bar at
Mhm.
night and you're getting to know people from all over the world, and you're running by them at least 12 times because you're going back and forth on the same 2 miles. So like, hey Jim,
Mhm.
hey, and talking to people. um but it was it was an experience, and I still look at the pictures. I'll go in, and the first iceberg I've ever seen,
Yeah.
the penguin colonies, all the things, climbing glaciers, all those things that I did, um were remarkable. So for me it wasn't so bad because I'm from Michigan, and cold weather as well. And if you in, no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. So if you're prepared.
Yeah.
um but but I ran with some people from Puerto Rico, from Texas, and from places where they're just not, you know, cold blooded. They're used to hot weather, and
Yeah.
they suffered. I mean, they were really really cold. Where I was, it's like, okay, I got this.
Yeah.
I had to deal with the exhaustion and what I now know was the heart issue, but it really wasn't too bad. It was, you just, you know, you're once you've run a couple marathons, your body knows what to expect.
Yeah.
Um, your body, you get naturally nervous. Your digestive system usually kind of clears itself out because your body knows it's about to do something really traumatic. And that's why you see long lines at the porta potties before runs, because everybody's
Mhm.
nervous and such. And you go through all that no matter what race you have, and your body's kind of takes over. And then to some degree you have to trust your training for any race, and don't try to achieve more than you're capable of, and know what you can and can't do. And so, you know how you feel that day. Did you sleep well? Did you train well? And then adjust your plan. It's like Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face. So you
Yeah.
toe the line, and you've got a plan, and then you adjust. So, um, but it's been you know uh, just a fantastic journey, a great hobby. I've met so many wonderful people, runners. It's a very supportive community,
Hmm.
that running community, and everybody wants everyone to accomplish and be healthy, and be safe. And I meet new people every week. I show up for a run, and there's someone new that shows up, and and you know and it is kind of cool, where they like, where have you run? I'm like, you know I, I've run all 7 continents. And and really, I haven't run any more marathons than any of my friends have. We've all run, kind of, that 10 to 20, count of marathons. The only difference is I bought airplane tickets and made an adventure out of it.
Hmm.
Um, but I know people that have run Detroit, 10, 12, 14 times, 20 times, because they love the race, and they run it every year. Where I like to run different races. The only race I've
Yeah.
ever repeated is the Marine Corps Marathon in Washington, D.C. And that was really by accident, because I had somebody that wanted to run it. And so they needed, someone to be with them. So I agreed. But I keep looking for that next location, that next adventure. So,
Good.
and hopefully, yeah, I'll keep going. That's, knock on wood,
Yeah.
right? You want to keep keep going. I'm 55, and with the exception of this little time period that we're in the middle of, I've been able to get my marathons in, and run the races that I want to run, and you know, I'll I'll keep going as long as I can.
Well, I I appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story, and um, I I just hope I get to see at least a quarter of what you've gotten to see in your
Yeah,
life. So
yeah, you will. Just make a point of it, set a goal, and tell people about your goal. Then you're committed, right?
yeah.
You want to be the guy that accomplishes what they say they're going to accomplish, right? And you're doing it, right? You got a podcast. I'd love to have a podcast. You're doing it. Um, so you can do amazing things, and I know you will.
Awesome. All right, thank you, Mike. And for
All
all
right.
you out there that have any questions, if you have any questions for Mike, I can forward it to him. Just email into.the.absurd.podcast@gmail.com. All right, thanks for listening.